Hey everyone, how you doing? Sean Huber here. Here's another testimonial from a friend of mine and client named Josh Perry. Josh, give an intro about what you do, who you are to the audience so they can get a feel for what's going on here.
Sure. My name is Josh. I've been in the logistics industry for a long time, and I am the director of marketing at a tech company related to logistics called Trekken.
What does Trekken do?
Trekken is records packages and onto the blockchain and tracks them and the integrity of the package with AI and blockchain solutions.
So where would I apply something like that, being that I'm not too techy here?
Uh, Transportation companies are buyers. Most of the products in the U.S. are moved by a company with less than 10 trucks, and
Okay,
so they want to reduce their insurance claims.
gotcha. So this would help them track packages and
Insurance
stuff.
claims, inventory, chain of custody, all recorded on the blockchain irrefutably.
It's interesting how so many jobs come about where we're looking for a solution to solve a problem and to simplify things, and you've come up with this thing, and how an idea comes from like a dream to an idea. And I always tell people, I'm like, you know what, you drive around in your car and look at every business that started with someone's dream, that then they said, hey, let's sit down and figure out this idea, and then let's take some action to make it happen. So when we first started doing some work together, where were you in this process of life?
As far as taking action, I was a hammer and I would drive things and myself into the ground. You know what I mean? They say that a hammer is always looking for a nail.
Right.
And so I had hammered my way into the only thing I knew how to be was a hammer, and I really needed to break my own shell and my own limitations of what I had set for expectations for myself.
What's interesting too on how our past has has a huge impact on our present. And I also do hypnosis with clients when I work with them. And a lot of times we don't realize where something comes from. And as we were doing some work, you had some aha moments where you're like, oh, where'd that come from? So what were some of those aha moments where you're like, now I know where that came from?
Um, Golly, that's a really personal question. There, there's quite a few really, and some of them were like, what am I doing with my life, right? Like, why am I situating my life all around work and what I'm uh, uh, been expected of me when I should situate my work and what I do around what I enjoy, right?
Mhm. And again,
And
the
but
reason I asked that question is because a lot of people in social media have this persona put up and they're doing a job, but they don't know who they are. And when we start doing the work, it's about figuring out more or less who a person is, not what they do. Everyone's like, oh, I do this. I'm like, I don't care what you do. And you're like, what do you mean? I'm like, no, who are you? And you're like, who am I? And then a lot of people start talking about who they were in the past. I'm like, no, 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 who you are now.
yeah,
And now who do you want to be? And everyone's like, I have no clue, because that question usually isn't asked. It's what do you want to do?
well, and here's what I find interesting, and this is another aha moment. So you have to be the person you are and internally be building the person that you will become, right?
Correct.
And so those are kind of like some of the big moments that I've gone through and going through your program even, that were like, I know once you know who you are and you live in that moment, not past or future, now you're talking about really being the creator of your own future. And there's at certain points in that discovery process, for sure, there's some points of fear that you really got to face, of like, even your own capability of building the person that you want to be, or your 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 worthiness issues getting in the way of stuff, and attaching your worth to these other things that really like it's been interesting to be guided through that process of
Right.
really looking at yourself.
Well, that's the interesting thing is people are like, well, this sounds like so esoteric and out there. I'm like, no, it actually is the thing that gets in the way of our success. And if we do it correctly, it creates the most amazing future. And we talked about different things. And I think something that's interesting that a lot of people don't realize is if we're not taking care of ourselves, how can we take care of other people? And I really want everyone I work with to have a solid foundation on knowing what is affecting them in a mental and a physical way. And you've discussed like you have a skin issue that was going on. And I'm like, well, that's inflammation, right? You're
Yeah,
like, well, I'm like, so what are you doing that's causing this inflammation? And you're like, huh? I'm like, and you're like, well, I have this medication for it. I'm like, but what is the medication doing? It's not solving the problem. It's just putting a band-aid on and a quick solution.
right.
So you did something completely different that had all kinds of different benefits where you changed the way you were eating.
For
And
sure.
how did that not only affect your skin, but also affected your thought process?
Well, that was a really interesting turn of events too, because number one, it did improve my skin pretty significantly. And I went into doing a carnivore diet with an attitude of like, man, this is going to be hard. I'm going to have all these cravings and I'm going to be
Right.
hungry and stuff. And even 10, 14 days in, I'm going, this isn't so bad. And like, I don't have a weird craving for a leafy green or like I thought I was going to feel sluggish and had a lack because I wasn't consuming these other things. And it really made me realize that like pulling a bow and arrow back, sometimes you got to restrict and contract a little bit and get slimmer on what you're doing to really shoot forward with an accelerated growth, and in this case an accelerated healing, right?
Right. And that's the thing is a lot of things that we take in, not just food, but outside information, it's not been filtered down because we're just like, oh, we'll go watch this video or we'll go read this. And we're like, whoa, wait a minute. How is that impacting me immediately? And sometimes it can shake you to the core. Some movies are very emotional and they feel good because there's an amazing outcome, or some can just make you think in all weird ways. And what people sometimes forget to realize is that's starting to attract the weird things. It's like when people put the TV on at night and they go to sleep, they don't realize that whatever's playing is affecting their subconscious. And by that happening and you're not in control over it, you're just absorbing everything. And that's what I like to explain to people is, oh, well, that little thing over here, that's this boxed cookie. It can't be that bad. But let's stack it with throughout the week what you've been doing. And your body's chemistry starts to shift and it starts craving things because gut bacteria start to go in the way of the negative, the bad bacteria. And people are like, well, what's this gut biome have to do with the way I'm doing business?
Oh,
Well,
well,
it produces the most serotonin in your entire body, and serotonin is a feel good hormone. And if that's out of whack, your brain's going to be out of whack. They're like, this sounds crazy. And I'm like, listen, let's look at your sleep. Let's look at what you're eating, your intake, your exercise. And you started doing some walking and doing some different things. What type of doors did that start to open? And at the same time, because you don't have to do this, right?
mhm.
Where were the things that you're like, oh, I faltered back to this, but instead of beating yourself up, you got back on track?
Well, walking in particular was a one that I had done before, and I had done like a 75-day hard challenge probably a couple years ago, and hadn't quite made the 75 days. I think I did 60 at my longest attempt, right? And so I clicked back into consistency of walking every day for about 5 or 6 months, and then I had a big run of parties that I did, and setting up production and all that kind of stuff, and got off of that, got lazy for a couple weeks, and had to get back on the horse by basically just making it a mandatory for myself.
Because you do see the differences when you're not doing things for you, but you're doing everything for everyone else. And that's the whole thing that we really want to talk about is when we're certain personalities like a pleaser and a giver, we sometimes put ourselves second. And there are certain situations that went on through the time that you and I have been working together that aren't I'm not going to call them everyday experiences, but there's times where, let's just get real, shit hits the fan and you're still here and you're still doing it. So what are the few things, I mean, you don't need to share everything in details. What are the few things since we started working together to now that have gone on in your life that you're like, if someone would have told me these negative things were going to happen and I was still going to keep on track, I would have told them they were crazy. Because again, coaching isn't about just results for business. They're results to create ourselves as a stronger, more resilient human being
Mhm.
so that we continue to move forward in a positive way. So, what are a few things, if you don't mind sharing, that you went through?
Sure. Yeah. Uh, Again, without going in too much detail, but I ended the longest relationship of my life and went through a kind of sort of divorce is what I call it.
Right.
Um, I I also had some stuff brought to light about a very huge situation with a large portion of my family as pertains to them being having cancer and getting cancer all the time. So there's 11 members of my family that have had cancers, and we've kind of identified the reason for that. Um, what else? I had to jump up and head to my uncle having a brain tumor recently, um, and then I have gone through situating, losing one business, getting funding and running out of funding for another, and starting another business.
And that all has happened in what, 6 months?
Uh, yeah, about 8 months probably for all of
Yeah.
that conclusively.
So this is what's interesting because things get thrown into life now. Again, through this process of me coaching, I had back get thrown out. I had pneumonia and I had pulmonary embolisms. Like
Yep.
these things happen. And guess what? Because of who we surround ourselves with and the support we have through coaching and through group programs, you get to be vulnerable. You get to realize, like, hey, I don't only have to share the great things that are going on in my life to make everything look perfectly positive and rosy, but I'm going to share some fears. I'm going to share some things I'm going through. And the interesting thing is, no one's being judged here. You're being supported.
Yep.
And that's the vulnerability piece that the hustle and grinders seem like in the world don't really like to share because they want everyone to think they got it all together. And I think being vulnerable and allowing ourselves to say, hey, yeah, maybe I could have done it a little different, or I handled this a little different than last time, and it's getting better. Those are the type of things that I love when I'm working with people, to see them, that time where they fell apart is shortened. Like,
Yep.
you also got really sick too, where you could barely breathe.
I did.
And Josh has what, one lung that functions
Dude,
correctly?
I've had half of my left lung removed.
Right.
Uh,
So think about that, people. Like, you got a breathing issue going on because you have an upper respiratory infection and you got 1.5 lungs going on. So that's the other thing is, I'm not here just to support people in business and in coaching, but it's also, here's some things that I know may help you out to keep you on track with your health. Because when it really comes down to it, like I said before and earlier, if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anyone else. And at the same time, yes, can we do more? True. Can we be better? Definitely. But as long as we know where we're at and where we want to go, that's what's really different. So where's the next thing that you really want to take yourself to from moving forward?
yeah, the present moment is my answer to
Yeah.
that because despite all those challenges you just talked about, and I think that's really just about being real with yourself because, like everybody goes through your challenges. Um, I think the life that I've been able to build myself out from that I have now from all those hardships is what I'm after. And so growing it from here is pieces of garden that grows itself. And that's that's been the biggest takeaway for me is that life didn't have to hustle and grind all the time. It needs to be about peace and tranquility and being humble and being uh, uh, a servant almost of what it is that you're trying to accomplish, right? No matter how big or small that accomplishment may be, it could be, a simple task of doing the dishes needs to be just the same as, building a multi-million-dollar tech company.
And this is what people, I think, forget to realize, that regardless of what you're going to do, it's going to be difficult.
Yep.
It's just constantly moving forward. So you just put on an event there in your hometown. Can you just let everyone know what it was about, and then what you believe it's going to turn into next?
Yeah. So, I also do lighting production and audio production and buy talent for bands and stuff. And the city of Fayetteville and their downtown Fayetteville coalition and parks department have a section of 3/4 of a mile of trail where we shot 14 5-watt lasers out in the woods and interactive projects for a silent disco there where kids can come out and play, and it's basically like throwing a rave in the middle of a trail in a lot of ways
Interesting.
without the
Right.
big sound and stuff. And so we had rollerbladers out there and stuff. And as they expand some of that trail stuff, we're doing another one in October. It's going to be the same scale and Halloween themed. But next year, as they open up the Upper Ramble, we want to extend it and make those same type of installations interactive and basically laser tag in a way, and laser hockey and different stuff that they can interact with through the different projector systems that we have, and really get out there and dance and
See,
have
and the
choreo.
thing that I think I want people to realize is, as you're saying it, you're smiling, because that's the passion and creativity side that we all need to have in our lives. And I think a lot of people downplay that. And again, we're going to put lasers on a trail in the middle of the woods for people to walk. Like, okay, how did that happen? And then you just build on the ideas, and you create the idea, and you make the concept, and you execute it. And what did people think of it once it was done and they experienced it?
Yeah, it's been a big hit. We had a great response from the mayor and a great response from the city. Lots and lots of parents come out. The rollerblade and roller skating thing was something we didn't even predict. It just kind of organically happened, and so we're looking at expanding it that way. And the funnest part, like you said, is just people running around going, "That was so cool!" after the event as they turn their headphones in, or "This is so much fun," and really like enjoying it, and being able to bring that to my community.
And here's the difference I want everyone to realize. Just because it happened once and it went over well, now you really got to dive into the work to expand it. And that's where coaching comes in. It's like, oh, we've got a year. No, do you know how much extra work has to go in this? And that's where not taking on too many projects leaves us open in the available time that we have to delve into these creative sides of life that actually creates businesses and creates
Mhm.
eyes on you, which then can also lead to other connections. And that's the whole thing. Is you've been a person that's helped me with a bunch of interesting connections for clients and for meeting new people. And I think that's the whole key to the coaching portion of this, is like, hey, do you realize what you already have? And people are like, huh? Yeah. I'm like, no, look at this. And they're like, wow. Like, what I actually do with people is, I'm like, here are all your pieces. What do you want the picture to look like to this puzzle? And we start rearranging things and putting them in order that your whole entire system works on, is the same flow, the same ups and downs, because your brain recognizes that pattern. What
Yep.
we want to do is create better set points. So instead of the lows being there, we're going to get rid of those, and we're going to smooth out that wave. Instead of being up and down crazy like a roller coaster, we're just going to give it a nice little wave, but we're going to bump up, and then we're going to bump up, and we're going to bump up, because the set point needs to change. And what I really love doing with people is like, listen, we got to get rid of who you are. And they're like, what do you mean? They get all defensive at first. I'm like, no, listen, who you are has gotten you here. To where you want to go has to be a different person. So let's work on, and yes, we're going to know the weaknesses, but what we're focusing on is the strength, because where you put the strength, the weakness disappears. So instead of focusing on what we don't want and where we're weak, we're focusing on what we want and our strengths, and everything else starts to climb up. And then when we realize, like, hey, I have a choice. I can either delegate that or I can do it, but where's my time best spent? it's not saying you can't do these things. It's saying, hey, who could do it more efficiently so I can focus on the things that I really enjoy? And that's the hardest part that I love helping people with is like, listen, man, you created yourself a job. Now it's time to create a career out of this and let other people help you get to where you want to go because you are where you are. And when people think about, I am where I am, most of their life has been a linear movement. It hasn't been a vertical movement. So, what do you
Sure.
believe is the biggest takeaway you got from the coaching so far?
You know, it's funny you say that it's linear or it's vertical, because I really think what you're coaching for me has been is more quantum, right? Like I shifted a whole different dimension of my life as the important section of what I valued out of life, which was my original. It was just rediscovering my own value system at the end of the day.
Right.
And for me, it was such a dramatic shift because I had been over in this one place and this one way of thinking that was like putting a round peg in a square hole my for so long that it felt really dramatic. In some ways, people could say it was a down swoop kind of swan rising, phoenix rising out of the
Right.
ashes or whatever, right? But at the end of the day, what other people think about what I'm doing has nothing to do with me. And I came to realize that everybody has their own little you that they built in their head.
Right.
The only reason that the only person I really had to be uh, answering to for my own life was that person inside of me that I was seeing, right? And so self reflection and the way that you've been able to poke at those things the way that you do has uh has really been huge, because it doesn't feel like you're in a game of operation.
And the thing is, I poke it because there's this really thin layer that, hey, it's hidden. I'm like, no, it's not. It's right there. It's obvious. And you're like, no, no, no.
Yeah,
But I thought I hid it. I'm like, no, no, it's obvious.
yeah,
And once we discover, like, ooh, I got to handle this mess. I'm like, it's not a mess. It's just something you have to handle. So once that's handled, everything else shifts. That's the coolest thing is getting our ducks in a row, we'll say, or just realizing like, hey, it's okay to step back to move forward faster, but we have to
mm-hmm.
take care of this foundation because if we don't take care of the foundation, we start building off of it and there's
Build a
cracks in it,
card.
we crumble every time. We're like, why isn't this working? Foundation isn't strong enough. And sometimes we got to build back from the top, not start at the bottom and work our way up. The neighbor right now, they're trying to create a ramp for her husband to take his electric wheelchair up, and she's at one end. I'm like, why are you starting at that end? And she's like, what do you mean? I said, start at this end over here and let's start at the top and build it down so it's a gradual. I said, I can help you. She's like, wow, how did you see that? And that's what I see is the little simple things that we can do in life to make life easier. It's like, listen, you don't have to wait in line. There's a side door here that's VIP. You just got to ask to go through it. What are you afraid to ask for? So that's what
Yep.
we got to really work on. Um, so thanks. I appreciate you being here, man, and taking your time to answer these questions. And I'm looking forward to watching what you do for the next couple of months coming up.
And I appreciate you.
Yeah.